Oh, we're broadcasting? Uh-oh. Okay, have to go to work. Could I have one of those pillows behind you? I just want to, or any of those pillows, yeah, because I want to, but yeah, throw it. Valeu. Boy. So, any questions? No questions.
How's the day going?
How's the day going? Pretty
How was
good.
the day?
How was the day? It was good. I really think these are important points. Oh my God, I look like some kind of overfed sultan or something. Anyway, the more I hear, like in preparation for this conference, I studied a lot of philosophy and history, and I really tried to prepare myself. And I was kind of astonished at how bad modern philosophy is, a lot of it. I mean, there's some points of wisdom, but I would read these or watch documentaries on these famous philosophers, and I was thinking, why is this person famous? They don't say anything intelligent. And it's just like, I mean, I have to admit here, I hope I don't offend anyone, but I consider a lot of modern art to be like horrible and not art at all. To call it pseudo art would be insulting art. Because when you say pseudo, it implies some resemblance. And if you look at like this horrific modern art where some person just throws some paint on a canvas, and then it's worth $1 million because some fool just went like this. I mean, it's madness. It's insanity. And it's not only the art, it's the philosophy as well. It's like madness. They have something called postmodernism, which is just, I think it's just madness. I explained that in my talk, that they say there are no great truths. There are no great truths, but that's the great truth. It's so obviously self-contradictory. It's astonishing. Like, how could anyone ever take these people seriously? And you look at other fools, like people like Heidegger, for example, who, I mean, basically it's in academic philosophy, it's the age of narcissism. You get all these people who say that before me, no one understood anything. That was Heidegger. Like, for 2,500 years, you have all these really brilliant people, but no one understood anything before me. And another fool like that was Wittgenstein. Well, he was a fool because he gave his inheritance away, But Wittgenstein, there's this quote from Wittgenstein where he says that after he wrote this book, Tractatus, and then it's like a big thing. Some people said the greatest philosophical work of the 20th century, Hare Krishna, and there's nothing there. It's like I read it and I thought, when do I get to the philosophy? And then he said that after he wrote that book, he didn't write other books because he'd already solved all the philosophical problems for the last 2,500 years. It's just these narcissists, these people that have these crazy ideas that no one else understands, that I've explained everything. And then when you read what they say, there's nothing there. There's just nothing there. It's just all this, it's almost trivial. And so that's one thing that really surprised me. And then, like, even another thing that kind of really struck me is how foolish a lot of science is. I mean, not the real science. I mean, real science is great. I love real science. I flew here from California. I mean, applied science, even like studying. I mean, I think it's amazing what they're doing. But the idea that this crazy idea, like I said in my talk, that the scientists are like the Roman emperor, and that, the Roman emperor, they would have these gladiators come out, and if the emperor put his thumb up, then the person would live. If he put his thumb down, the person, be died, be thrown to the lions or killed in some other weird, kinky way. And they're like that, they will decide whether let's say, Krishna consciousness or anything else or any other philosophy or idea, whether it's valid or not. It's like, who asked them? These people are, I mean, I showed in my talk, there's a physical, metaphysical universe. They don't know anything about the metaphysical world. And all of this cheating that's going on in the sense of preaching materialism and calling it science. It's just like if you look at evolution, we have a fossil record. And okay, that's nice. We have a fossil record. Many anomalies, as pointed out by Siddhartha and Karma, but still basically we have a fossil record that, with some very significant exceptions, shows that things tended to go from simple to more complex over time. And which, by the way, the Bhagavatam also describes. That's actually in the Bhagavatam. It's not against our teachings. But how did it happen? That's not science. That's philosophy. How did it happen? They don't know how it happened because they weren't there. And not only that, if, example, I mean, I had so many things I wanted to say and didn't have a chance to say, so now I'll punish all of you and keep you here and I'll say everything. But for example, let's say the University of Florida, they have obviously there's so much plumbing, there's so much electricity, there's so much maintenance. All of that is mechanical and impersonal, and yet there are people that manage that. And so there is nothing about a mechanical system which can ever prove that no one is maintaining it. If you study the universe, either level of cosmology or physiology, human physiology or evolution or whatever, biology, whatever you want, and you find this, I mean, incredibly, literally incredibly, unbelievably sophisticated system. Each cell actually in the human body has a motor, you know, like a motor on a motorcycle. It's just, I mean, it is so insanely sophisticated, the engineering. And so if you look at that, if you look at biology, microbiology, if you look at the finely tuned universe, which there's like a whole long list of things in the universe, which if they were slightly different, there couldn't be life. If you look at all these things and your best guess is that no one built it, that's your best guess because you don't know. You weren't there and you can't duplicate the creation of the universe. That's the heart of science, that you have a controlled experiment through observation, because observation is a form of control. For example, if someone is more powerful than you, you don't have access to them. One example of a power relationship, to sound very postmodern and stupid, one example of a power relationship in which someone has more power than someone else is that the more powerful person controls access. A more powerful person can see the less powerful person whenever they want. But the less powerful person cannot see the more powerful person. So even observation, even access is a form of control. It's an expression of power. And so the heart of the empirical method is observation and experimentation. And results you must be able to duplicate them. If you perform an experiment and claim that you found something and no one else can get that result, it's unacceptable. So can scientists, have they observed the beginning of the universe? No. Can they experimentally recreate a universe? No. So therefore, strictly speaking, you have this super, super ridiculously sophisticated universe, which is also full of art. It's not merely full of infinitely sophisticated engineering. It's also full of art. Whether you look at magnified pictures of snowflakes, of sand grains, everywhere you look in the universe, you find two things: fantastic engineering and art. And so if you come into a situation where you find fantastic engineering and amazing art, and your best guess is no one did this, That's your best guess. And the reason is that scientists continue, many of them, to make absolute asses out of themselves by saying that's their best guess, is because they're not doing science at all. They're preaching philosophical materialism, and they're pretending that it's science. So when they find a fossil record, that's science. When they put the bones together and try to reconstruct the anatomy of a particular creature, that's science. When they do carbon dating, that is science. All that is science. But when they say that no one built this, that is not science. That is religion. That is, they're preaching their absurd philosophy, which they don't even believe, because they're preaching that everything just happens by material causes. But as I explained, if it's true that everything happens by material causes, there cannot be logically anything like morality. It cannot be wrong to kill an innocent person if there's only matter. It is not morally wrong. The only way it can be wrong, morally wrong, to kill an innocent person is if the universe is bidimensional. It's very simple. Sexism, racism, atrocities, you name it. Every kind of evil is not evil if there's only matter. It's logically impossible. It's just like, for example, as I said before, if someone says, I have a square circle, and I say, no, actually, you don't have a square circle, I don't have to investigate. All I have to know is what the word square means in English and what the word circle means in English, and that's all the information I need to know that it is logically impossible. There can never be a square circle. I simply have to know what the words mean. And so when someone says that nothing, this material monism, that nothing exists except matter, I know that it's logically impossible, if that is true, for anyone to ever do anything which is morally wrong or bad. It's logically impossible, just like you can't have a square circle. Oh, water. I'll go open my sporch. Opening current. So, Saud, you? Because to get a PhD in biology or physiology or physics or, quantum mechanics, to get a PhD, you don't have to take a course in philosophy. And you certainly don't have to take a course in epistemology. You don't even have to take a course in philosophy of science. You can be philosophically an idiot, as most of them are, and still go on television and give lectures in universities about how there's only matter. And you have no idea what philosophy is. You have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea that you're preaching a sectarian philosophy and calling it science. So this cheating is going on. It's just a big scam. It's just a bunch of people. And the amazing thing is the way Krishna has bewildered them, or Maya. I mean, someone bewildered these people because they're dedicating their lives to proving that they will not exist. They're dedicating their lives to proving their own annihilation. Is that sick or what? I mean, what are they doing? It's like, let's say, for example, like that movie with Tom Hanks called The Castaway. Anyone see that movie? He's lost on an island. Honk if you like Tom Hanks. Anyway, so that movie, he's lost on an island, and he's desperate. He's there for for a couple of years, and he has a long beard. And he's just desperate. He has enough coconuts there to stay alive, fortunately. Long live the mighty coconut. But he's
in a soccer ball.
Yeah, he puts messages in bottles, and he puts messages on the sand so maybe an airplane will see it. The point is, he's trying to save his life. Does he know that someone will get the bottle? No, he doesn't know that. Does he know that some kind of airplane will see the message on the sand? No, he doesn't know that, but it's his only hope. So here we are, we're in material bodies that, I mean, it really looks like these bodies are going to die. And so your only hope not to die, because even if you believe in bionics and you believe that ultimately, you know, whatever, it's not going to happen in your lifetime. So, you know, dream on. So if you want to, your only hope to survive is that there's something like an eternal soul. And yet, rather than like Tom Hanks on the island, you know, try to investigate it, try to see if there's some way that I'm a soul. And there's so much evidence you are, by the way, by the fact that the universe is bidimensional, by the fact that your body's changing, but yourself stays the same, you're the same person. There's so much evidence. So rather than, I mean, you actually have evidence. You could say it's suggestive, it's not final evidence, but there's a lot of very suggestive indications that you are a soul. And so rather than try to pursue your only hope to survive, you dedicate your life to establish your annihilation. How could any sane person do that? Why? How could anybody be motivated? They hate God so much, or they hate their own self so much, that they're dedicating their whole life to establishing their annihilation. So there's something really, I mean, that's enough to convince anyone that there is an illusory potency in the world. I mean, for example, you have the story in Krishna book where this demon got a power from Lord Shiva that if he touched anyone's head, that person's head would split apart. And so Krishna tells the person, oh, you don't believe that, Lord Shiva, everyone knows Lord Shiva makes false promises. I don't think he really gave you that power, but try it out. You know, touch your head and see if he really gave it. And so the demon touches his head and dies. So you can say, well, come on. I mean, how could the demon be that stupid? Well, maybe he's just like a scientist. I mean, to prove their point, they're willing to literally annihilate themselves in the literal sense of the word nihil. Nihil in Latin means nothing. And so to annihilate literally means just totally obliterate. There's nothing left. They are willing to annihilate themselves just to win an argument. So what's going on? Hey, Shanti.
Come on. Is room right here? Sure.
Come on, and we're making points. You have to. She's a born floor sitter. I mean, since she was a baby.
I've been trained since a young age to be able to do this.
Been on the floor since I was a baby. So, what's that old blues song? Hey! You know that old blues song? Cream did it, that born under a bad sign. What is it? I've been down since I began to crawl. If it wasn't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Hey, Jairati. Anyway, so I'm making these points that people, scientists that dedicate themselves to proving their own annihilation. I gave the example of Tom Hanks in Castaway.
Okay.
You know the movie?
Yeah.
Or you do everything. You put a message in a bottle. You put a message in the sand. So if your only hope is to survive, is to be a soul, but you dedicate your life to proving you'll be annihilated. It's sick. I mean, there's something. It can only be Krishna's illusory energy. And when they do that, so anyway, these are some of the points. I feel like someone that just realized there's this huge government scam. Well, obviously we've known that forever, but so the presumption, the arrogance, the sheer foolishness for someone trained in the physical sciences to think that they are somehow authorized or competent to make metaphysical statements. This cheating where philosophical materialism is masquerading as science. It's so mobilizing the vast, almost unlimited personal and financial resources of the Hare Krishna movement. Okay, forget that. So, any questions? Anyone, please. I mean, if someone could defend these people, please do so. I mean, even if it's just for the sake of bringing out logical points. Yes, Gargs, as he's called.
Okay. Well, somebody could say that an eternal God who's all good and all powerful, there's no evidence of that, and it's inconceivable to think of someone's always existed.
Okay, Gargamuni, this is another Gargamuni, for those of you who know the other Gargamuni. Too little information. Anyway, he asked, basically, it's inconceivable that someone could exist forever?
Yeah, I mean, that, you're saying how it's crazy to say all this art, all this engineering, and think nobody did it.
Okay, so I said It's crazy to think that all this art and engineering, no one did it. I would say exactly the opposite. I would say that the fact that we are so existentially, I'm going to use that big word there. The fact that we are so deeply, profoundly dissatisfied with mortality, that something strikes us as profoundly unnatural, that let's say you love someone and you have a relationship. It could be, a romantic relationship. It could be parents and children or siblings or friends, but you have a deep relationship and then suddenly it ends. I would say that at the deepest level, that strikes us as unnatural. Something which in the best of worlds would never happen.
So someone would say that is evidence that God doesn't exist. Why would he allow us to suffer?
Well, okay, someone would say that's evidence God doesn't exist. You're skipping around 19 philosophical steps there.
Sorry.
That's okay. You're supposed to be you're supposed to take the part of the atheist, and you're supposed to make yourself look bad so I look good. That's the job description.
It comes natural for me.
So, okay, if we look at this, we have to separate. I promise I'll stop saying we have to separate obvious psychological conditioning from deep philosophical intuition. In other words, if you walk down, let's say every day you walk to work, and every day you walk by a building, and every day you walk by, there's someone in front of the building begging for money, wearing a dhoti. Anyway, so let's just say every day you walk by the building, there's someone begging. And so if that's the only building you've ever walked by in your life, it could seem strange to you to walk by a building and there isn't someone begging for money, or that's why people are surprised. For example, let's say you live in a very poor country and you come to a very rich country, everything's amazing. Everything's amazing because it's just not anything that you're accustomed to, anything you expect. Or say if you live in a very rich country and go to a very poor country. And so we become conditioned. When we repeatedly have the same experience, in any sense, it could be, it could be in terms of relationships, in terms of business, art, sports, anything. Like we've played this team 100 times and we always win because they always do this, and then suddenly they do something else. And so and that's just the way that we're wired. Because not only does, in other words, there's actually a two-way relationship between consciousness and neurology. On the one hand, because we're wired a certain way, we behave a certain way. But on the other hand, every time we choose through our free will to engage in certain actions, we are rewiring our brains. That's why things are habit forming. Because if I do something and it's habit forming, or, you know, and if it goes too far and becomes an addiction, and there are bad habits also, what does that mean? You can say habit forming, you can say addiction, you can even say I've become good at something. Like, for example, when I first try to play the keyboard, that my fingers just will go everywhere except on the key they're supposed to go on. But then as you keep practicing, you become good at it. Or sports, or, you know, art, or art, you know, crafts, like, you know, making things. The very fact that you become good at things by repetition, the fact that certain activities are habit forming or addictive, can only mean one thing. You are changing your neurology. You are rewiring your brain, because we know that for all of our conscious activities and events, mental events, there is a corresponding neurological platform. It doesn't mean our consciousness is caused by the neurology, but it's there. So it goes both ways. We are also recreating our brain by the choices we make. And it's simply the way the world is that repetition leads to a certain kind of proficiency. And in fact, for example, we have the word sadhana, which means practice, practicing bhakti yoga. In the Bhagavad Gita, they use another Sanskrit word. Sadhana became the word for practice later. But back at the time of the Gita, Krishna uses the word abhyasa. Abhyasa. And for example, he talks about abhyasa yoga, by, you know, spiritual practice. And so, so practice, but the word abhyasa literally means also repetition. Because, for example, let's say I'm your music teacher. Can you afford it? Anyway, let's say I'm your music teacher, and let's say I say, as music teacher, I always say, okay, you have to play this 5 times. In other words, practice means repetition, and repetition means rewiring the brain. So therefore, getting back to your question, you see, this is not an age-related, I forgot what you said. This is because the fact that we are used to mortality, we are habituated to mortality, it's simply because that's been all of our experience. So therefore, I'm saying there's a difference between obvious mental conditioning, because that's what I see all the time, as opposed to deep philosophical intuition. And I would say that our deep philosophical intuition actually contradicts our obvious mental conditioning, because we're used to people passing away, but at the deepest level, at our deepest intuitive level, it seems wrong. That's not the way it should be. Or bodies shouldn't grow old. I mean, I was doing just fine as a teenager. What happened? And so if you look at her, well, actually, I joined the Hare Krishna at age 20. Before that, I was lower than let me think of something really gruesome. I was lower than a fruitive armadillo. There's like this competition, ISKCON, to think of the most horrible thing that you deserve to be rather than a It's like it's a whole art form. Yes.
But how do you know the difference? Like you're saying, you're just feeling that.
That's good. That was good.
Feeling that something else isn't. So
that was good. So Darana asked, that was really good. She said, how can you tell the difference? How do you know that you're just really feeling something? Because, first of all, because I use the right words. I said philosophical intuition. But we can go with feeling. Something deep inside cannot be denied. Smoke gets in your eyes by the platters, 1959. Anyway, so because we do have the ability in our normal life, we do have the ability to, in a sense, measure the depth of our feelings. Like, let's say, for example, like, okay, I want to play golf today. Not really. I can't believe people carry around these heavy bags. But anyway, let's say someone says, I want to play golf today, and then they find out, oh, your brother just had a car accident, needs you. He's injured. I mean, obviously, you say, well, in my scale of values, I think golf is more important. No, it's like people, that's the sociopath response. But the idea is at every moment in life, we are actually negotiating scales of values. And so how do we negotiate? How do we measure these scales of values? Because we're constantly making choices because we think something is more important than something else. And so sometimes it's obvious, like it's more important that I eat today rather than, do something else and starve to death. So, I mean, some things you could say are just brute survival. It's just an animal instinct that we have to eat, we have to rest, and so on and so forth. But then there are discretionary choices. In other words, there are choices where let's say if you want to have any kind of life, you have to feed yourself, or you have to stop at red lights. You can't engage in suicidal behavior if your intention is not to kill yourself. And so on that level, it's just mere survival. But then we get to another level of choices where, let's say you have a choice of several things, any one of which could give you a, let's say, you would survive. Oops. Welcome back. So let's say there are other kinds of choice. I look terrible in the picture. I think I look like I weigh about 300 pounds. Anyway, I'm a sannyasi and a guru, and therefore,
Your body.
thank God. So but there are other choices that don't involve survival or things like that. They're not like not choices where one choice is dramatically the only one you can morally make, or even for your own survival of loved ones. But then you have to prioritize. But even in those choices, I mean, how do you know there's more important, let's say, to help someone who literally you have to save their life, and you can save their life. Maybe someone, let's say, was in a car accident and fell into a river and they're face down, they're going to drown, and you actually have the power to, rush down to the riverbank and pull the person out. You can actually do that. And so how do you know you should do that? So if you think about it, just normal life. Anyone who, let's say, who has a normal life, who takes appropriate measures for their own survival and the survival of those they care about, and who has, let's say, the reasonably normal set of values, moral values, so that maybe this person's not a saint or a martyr, but, basically a decent human being. And so just to be a decent human being, you have to really have a hierarchy of values. And what do you base that on? I mean, how do you know something's really more important than something else? How do you know this is really the right thing to do, that I will be a bad person if I don't do that, or I'll be a bad person if I do something? How do you know that? And it gets back to the point I was making in my lecture today, which is now my super talking point. And that is that we do have foundational knowledge. We have self-evident knowledge. For example, I think 3 times in Chaitanya Charitamrita, 3 or 4 times, whatever it is, Lord Chaitanya says to Sarvabhauma and Prakashananda, the exact words are Swata Pramana Veda, which literally means the Veda is self-evident. Swata, swa, means one's own. And from that, I don't think we have in your language, Latvian, but in Spanish, it's from the Sanskrit sua, which is actually originally swa, like swaraj. You have the Sanskrit su, the Italian sua, the Portuguese sua. Sua in Italian, you have the French sa or son, feminine, masculine. And actually in German, you have sein.
We have Sava.
What?
Sava. In Latvian,
Sava.
Sava.
Yeah, Sava. That's swa, Sava. So you have this word in all these languages, which means one's own. And so then taha, as you know, is a fascinating little ablative particle. Anyway, it means from. In other words, swataha means from itself or by itself. From itself, by itself. And so swata in pramana is evidence or proof in Sanskrit, like the pramanas. And it's interesting because ma is a Sanskrit verb to measure, and which of course, so matra, like nimitta matra means the measure. It's used as a suffix, meaning like nimitta matra, like just be this measure, just this much, no more, no less. So matra, of course, we have in English as metric or meter. That's the same word. And pramana, mana means the measure of something also. So pramana means, and pra means sort of doing something directly. So pramana, in a sense, in Sanskrit means direct measurement. And measurement here, just like with Protagoras, the sophist said at the time of Socrates, that man, which was a very cynical viewpoint, man is the measure of all things. Of things that are, that they are, of things that are not, that they are not. In other words, he was postmodern before his time. That there is no objective standard, just man is the measure, like whatever we declare things to be, that's what they are. And the reason I mention that is because mana or measure here literally means just like to prove something. Because measuring is sort of like means even in a connotative sense, just proving something, providing evidence. So swataha pramana, from itself, evidence, Veda. And as I explained, of course, that as Aristotle pointed out, that you need a self-evident fact to avoid being pushed into an infinite regress of proofs. Simple logical point. And so the epistemic, that's from epistemology, the epistemic principle, which in a sense responds to Aristotle's warning, is called foundationalism. Foundationalism, if you're building a house, you need a foundation. You can't build a castle in the air, so to speak. They say that in Latvian? Castle in the air? How do they say that? I'm just curious.
Gainesville.
So you first have to build a foundation. So when you're building a system of knowledge, whether it's empirical science, whether it's theology, whether it's philosophy, whatever it is, you have to start with a foundation. And the foundation cannot be the foundation if it's leaning on something else. I mean, think of building a house. If you put down the foundation, but the foundation is leaning on something else, which is unstable, it's not a foundation. The foundation has to be able, is autonomous. It will support the house. And so, in fact, everyone has an epistemic foundation. And the most ridiculous thing, I mean, it's hard to believe, really, is that the anti-foundationalists, philosophers who tend to be postmodernists, are foundationalists. They say, no, well, there's no great truth that can be the foundation. But that is precisely their foundation. That is their great truth. It's absurd. It's like, are these people really adults? Anyway, and they're famous philosophers. So we have, as I pointed out, a metaphysical foundation. For example, for most people in the modern world, moral equality is foundational. In other words, people assume that everyone, no matter what their race, well, gender, some people are, anyway, but no matter what I would say, but the law recognizes that. Are there racists in the world? Of course. Are there chauvinists in the world? Of course. However, there's a lot of stupid people in the world, but laws are made, hopefully, to express a society's best understanding, even if some people don't get it. And so the idea that everyone has equal rights under the law, it's not like, okay, you've been accused of a crime, but you're a woman, so they don't have to prove it. Or like one of the greatest American novels of the 20th century was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. it's just, everyone knows that, To Kill a Mockingbird. And it's all about a small town in the South, which is actually where she lives. She grew up in a small town in Alabama. It's about a small town in the South where a black man is falsely accused of raping a woman, I think it was. And he's innocent, but he's falsely accused. But because of racism, the standard of evidence has been dramatically lowered. The standard of evidence has been dramatically lowered until sort of the hero of the story, Atticus Finch, also known as Gregory Peck. Anyway, Atticus Finch is a lawyer, the smart, sort of a young guy, he's a father, and his daughter tells the story. His young daughter tells the story. He steps in, and he lives in a small town. Everybody knows everybody. And so to defend this man, this black man, means that everyone's going to hate you. But he steps in. He says, he's for justice. So because for Atticus Finch, justice, the fact that everyone has a right to justice, was a foundational truth. And then all his other decisions were built on that foundation. And in fact, that is, in most countries that are considered to be civilized or sort of civilized, there's a sense of justice. Everyone has an equal right to justice. So is that really true? Because if it turns out that materialism is right, which again, is just an absurd pseudo-philosophy, if materialism is right and there's nothing but matter, then then justice has no power because it's not an empirical object. There's no physical thing that is a justice. It's metaphysical. And so there's two possibilities. We live in a bi-dimensional universe and justice is real, or we live in simply a material universe and it's just a fairy tale. It's a fiction. And actually you can go around, you can kill your neighbors, you can rape anyone you want, you can steal, you can perform the most disgusting activities, and you're really not doing anything wrong. Now, if someone says, as these clowns say, pseudo philosophers, if someone says that consciousness is just material, everything is just material, then they cannot say that it's wrong to commit the most horrible acts. But they do say it's wrong because they're hypocrites. And then they come in with all these, frankly, ridiculous, childish arguments of how even if everything is matter, we still should honor justice. Why? Because it's in our rational self-interest to honor a social contract. Is one stupid idea. Actually, it's not. If you have a lot of power and a lot of money, it's actually in your rational self-interest not to honor the social contract. Tear up the contract. Because the social contract says that you have to pay so many taxes and you can't just do whatever you want. You can't just seize the power you want. You can't, even though you have the power to rule as a tyrant and just have anything you want. Let's say a man, just have any woman you want, steal people's property, kill anyone you don't like. And so if you actually have power, and let's say we live in a completely material world in which there's no metaphysical dimension, then it's absolutely in your self-interest to tear up that social contract. Yes?
Yeah, so like an agnostic, obviously the atheist point of view is kind of silly because it's hard to say that there's no God just as much as if we say that there is a God. Even harder because you're trying to prove it.
Well, it's even sillier to say there's no God. I'll explain why. It's actually much sillier, according to philosophy, because in epistemology, the two main epistemological strategies, at least the ones that have had most traction in the West, are foundationalism, which is sort of what's really going on. But there's another one called coherentism. And that means that that everything you say should be coherent. Like if you say God is the most merciful and he tortures his own children forever for just mental mistakes, like believing the wrong doctrine, that's incoherent. Someone who is merciful cannot torture other people, much less his or her own children, for mental mistakes. It's just, so therefore that philosophy is completely incoherent and therefore philosophically invalid. So that's coherentism. Of course, there's a strong and a weak form of coherentism. The strong form is that if there's coherence in a worldview or in a philosophy, then that is, it's necessary that it be coherent, and that's also sufficient to establish it as true. But most people don't accept that because, for example, take Star Wars. Once on a galaxy far, far away in the galaxy. Anyway, it's like, remember the first Star Wars where the bottom of the spaceship goes over your head for about 2/3 of the movie? Anyway, so if you look at this, at what we call the Star Wars universe, and it's interesting because in science fiction, sort of the rule for writers in science fiction is that you can change all the laws of nature, do things, but it has to be coherent, it has to be consistent. A reader will accept fantastic new things, but readers won't accept self-contradiction, incoherence. Like in chapter 1, the hero can do this, but in chapter 2, he can't do it. There's no reason given. And so, therefore, you can have a story which is completely coherent, but it's all fiction. And so, therefore, it's the weaker form of coherentism, which is actually, much more widely accepted, which is that internal coherence is necessary but not sufficient. Now, if you look at theism and atheism, what we find is that you can give, if you're smart, a coherent account of theism. It is possible, if you're not stuck to this total philosophical disaster of saying that, this is our first life and we had no life before this one, then that's a theological disaster. You can't explain evil in the world and so on. But if you have a good theology, then you can give a coherent account of God. Now, people may say it's true or not true, but it's coherent, which is a big virtue in philosophy. Now, if you're an atheist, it's incoherent. Because if there's no God, no one knows everything. And if no one knows everything, no one knows if there's a God or not. So I would say that theism has the advantage, whether it's true or not, of being coherent, whereas atheism, prima facie, on its face, is incoherent and cannot be made coherent.
So you attribute the metaphysical to the moral state?
No, I'm saying that the fact that we have irrefutable, undeniable moral intuitions, we actually know that some things are wrong and some things are right. For example, let's say you have a child. You know that it is your moral duty to take care of your child.
So does a dog.
What's that?
So does a dog.
Yes, because dogs are also souls.
Right.
And they've still got something going for them. So,
But you actually have to teach children empathy. We don't naturally always have it.
yeah, although it's true, but at the same time, I've seen many cases where kids grew up in really bad families with bad parents, and their response was, I never want to be like that. Because you're right. I mean, you're right. Children who are, let's say, brought up in total savagery, where no one around them, not their parents, not their neighbors, no one around them has any moral concern. Yeah, it's going to be a problem. But at the same time, actually, Aristotle gave a false argument. He did a lot of good things, but Aristotle got some things wrong. Got the church in trouble because the church adopted Aristotelian cosmology, and then Copernicus said, well, actually, anyway, they couldn't buy that. So, but, so Aristotle made the argument. That we could not have innate knowledge, because that's what Plato said, like in the Meno. Plato said that learning, in a sense, is remembering. because we have these deep memories of a higher truth, which is what Krishna says in the Bhagavatam. He asks the soul in chapter 4th canto, Api Smarasi Mam, do you remember me? Which proves, by the way, that we were never with Krishna. So, so anyway, so Aristotle argued that if something is intrinsic, if it's innate knowledge, why would you have to learn it? I think that's a really bad argument. He should have just not been so eager to criticize his guru, Plato. Because there are things that we do have natural abilities that simply need to be awakened. For example, we can acquire language. If a child grows up in a speech community, in a community where people, whether it's Latvian or English or whatever, children, they just naturally acquire language. Now, if a goldfish swims around in that same speech community, will not end up like, how are you? It won't end up speaking English. Goldfish don't learn English, and even dogs don't learn English. Although some of their masters think that they're having intimate, profound, quasi-verbal communications with that dog. But anyway, so the point is that how is it that we can acquire language? Because we're already wired to do so. We already have that ability. It just needs to be activated. And so there are, you could say, innate capacities. Maybe we weren't born with English grammar, but we were born with the ability, we were born completely set up to acquire language. It's just like, for example, if you, let's say you buy a computer. Great minds think alike. Yeah, it's just like if you have a computer and there are no files in the computer yet, at least no text files, but the whole thing is built for text files. So we are totally wired we have moral intuition. It just needs to be activated. It's like you call the number and activate your credit card. It just needs to be activated. But the moral intuition is there. It just has to be turned on.
And that's God?
What?
And that's God.
No, God has given us. I mean, we're part of God. We have moral intuition. It's like, for example, let's say your computer. You have to turn it on. And everything's there. So that moral intuition simply has to be turned on. Then maybe the on switch is just association with other human beings. That's an on switch rather than giving us something that was not there before. And if you understand that we have a past life, then we were moral before. We already know these things. We just have to be reminded through socialization. Yes.
Don't we also have this innate drive towards selfishness?
Good question. Please don't ask thoughtful questions. Just like lobbing, like softballs on him out of the
Sorry, I won't do that.
So, say it again.
Don't we also have this innate kind of instinct towards selfishness?
Don't we have an innate instinct towards selfishness? It's a very interesting question. Krishna, in the Bhagavatam, sort of gives us this whole moral philosophy, or sort of how morality develops. And it's all based on our self-love. Because in a sense, if you don't love yourself, you can't love anyone else, because the only way you can even understand that someone else is a person is by empathy. And empathy is transitive. I mean, it has an object, but how can you empathize if you don't even like yourself? Because that's what empathy means. It means to use the common expression, and no one really remembers what it originally meant. You identify with someone. What does it mean to identify with? It means you accept something as part of your identity, or you see yourself in something else. So if you don't see yourself in a favorable way, what does empathy even mean? Empathy means you see someone like yourself. You don't like yourself, and you don't like them. So I would say, with all the authority granted to me as an ISKCON sannyasi in Guru. And you know the ISKCON infallibility principle. So I
Learned it since I sat on the floor the first time.
so I think the idea is that selfishness is a sort of a corrupted form of self-love. Because after all, if you love Krishna and you are part of Krishna, how can you not love yourself? If you don't like yourself, it means you don't like part of Krishna. Okay, Krishna, I like this part of you, but not that part of you. Because you are part of Krishna. So there is a self-love which is not egotism. It's rather, it's based not on vanity or pride, it's the opposite. It's based on understanding that you are part of something infinitely greater than yourself. So there is a self-love which is actually based on humility. Because unless you're humble, there's no room in your head for reality. You know, because narcissism and vanity takes up a lot of disk space, you know? To you to try to sound young and cool by using a computer metaphor. So that's the point. I mean, vanity, self-centeredness, it just takes up a lot of space in your head. There's not much room for anything else. And also, if I think that I'm the center of reality and we're all kind of like, you know, flawed in our own ways. I'm just being humble. You guys really are flawed. You gotta laugh, right? If you belong to a... So if I think that if I'm self-centered and considering that I'm imperfect, it's like, wow, that's not a very interesting universe. If I'm the center of reality, me with all my problems and all my, then, yeah, I mean, not a very appealing universe. If the best thing in the universe is me, God help the universe. I mean, in a sense, so self-centeredness really, it radically shrinks your reality. It imprisons you in a very, very tiny world. Whereas when we're humble, and you know, I'm going to get there any day. I'll let you know. I'll send out a tweet when I actually become humble. But anyway, but the more, you know, the more we become humble, it's like there's infinite space in your consciousness for all the beautiful, amazing, divine things that exist. And so I think that's an important point. There is a self-love which is based on humility, because it's only by being humble, and humble doesn't mean self-loathing, by the way. You know, humble people don't hate themselves, because if I hate myself, I hate myself. You know, if I hate myself, what that means is hating yourself is actually based on pride and vanity. Because the only reason I could hate myself is I see myself separate from Krishna. If I saw myself as part of Krishna, how could I hate part of Krishna? And so when you don't like yourself, it's because you first perform the vain act of seeing yourself separate from Krishna, and then you don't like what you see. So yeah, humility is not self-loathing. It's not low self-esteem. Low self-esteem simply means that you forgot God, because Krishna loves you. I mean, no matter how much I see myself as kind of a train wreck, the point is that Krishna loves me. I saw this bumper sticker that said, Jesus loves you. Everyone else thinks you're a... Yeah. And so... So the point is that if Krishna does love me, and Krishna will love me forever, and if I know that, then no matter how disappointed I am in myself or whatever, the most important fact about my life is Krishna. And if Krishna loves me, I can't hate myself. I can sort of lament and all that, but that's such a powerful fact that, to use a term that we use sometimes, the supreme personality of Godhead, that great ISKCON term, that Krishna, the absolute truth, the Vasudeva Sarvam, that everything that exists is within and part of him, and that infinitely great, infinitely beautiful, infinitely perfect person loves me. I mean, even if some ordinary person, like you get to know, oh, so-and-so, she really likes you. Oh, really? Well, yeah, that's nice, yeah. So, meanwhile, our head's going. So if we get, no matter how despicable we are, if you find out someone really likes you, it's like, oh, I think I'll go with their perception of me. I think I'm gonna ditch. I'm gonna give up my low self. I think she's probably seen me more objectively. And so, I mean, not to speak of Krishna. Who's that?
Sorry.
Oh no, that's not maybe some interesting person. So, it's Glani. Muito Glani. Buenísimo. So, yeah, so if you think that Krishna's opinion is slightly more important than yours, then you can never hate yourself, because Krishna always loves you. So Krishna really is one-stop psychiatric care. I mean, yes.
I've been having a hard time understanding the humility of the great acharyas. It seems like there's some.
You haven't seen it in me?
Like there's these examples that seem like apparent contradictions.
Such as
Lord Chaitanya saying, like talking about how he has no taste for the holy names, but then talking about his ecstasies. Or I can't think of.
Okay, let's go with that. Yeah. Let's go with that. That is when you study the philosophy of language, or the philosophy of speech, there are different categories, there are different kinds of speech. To give one example, there is what is called this performative speech act. Performative speech act means that by saying something, you make it true by saying it. An example is, for example, in a soccer match, the referee says, or the whatever, you're out of the game. The red card. Cartão vermelho. So when the referee says you're out of the game, his saying that makes it true. Another example is, I now pronounce you man and wife. The act of saying it creates the reality. It becomes true, but it becomes a fact in the world when it's spoken. And so that's called a performative speech act, because it actually creates a reality simply by saying something. Or this meeting is now adjourned. The sweetest words in administration. So another category, so if you understand there are different categories of speech, another speech category, and this one I kind of labeled myself. I can't go like that, because it's mooching. So imagine me blowing on my hand. It's what I call ecstatic speech. In other words, let's say, like Lord Chaitanya says, I'm the most fallen, or Prabhupada says, I'm very fallen. Now, it's not speech which ultimately describes reality. It is speech, rather, which you could say indirectly reveals something true in the world. Like, for example, that Prabhupada is a pure devotee, that he's a Paramahansa, that he has this ecstatic humility. And so, but it's not literally true. Now, when a pure devotee says, let's say, I'm fallen, it's not simply a true statement like when we say it. You know, we can say, or even when we say it, I mean, no one in this room is really despicable and anything like that, because you're all here. You've all come to hear about Krishna. So all of you have a lot of credit. But let's say someone does something really wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And then I say, you know, I'm fallen, whatever. So in that case, it's like lamentation, Prabhupada said, is purification. It's a means of, because in a sense, if I say I'm fallen, or let's say if Prabhupada says he's fallen, where it's obviously not true, what's really happening there? What's really happening is that we know that Prabhupada is not actually engaged in anything like unhealthy psychological self-hatred. Because we know that when pure devotees speak that way, it in no way immobilizes them in the way that, let's say, when you really hate yourself, it kind of, you can't do anything. You don't feel motivated. You don't want to, isn't it? You lose your motivation because you hate yourself. It's not like that. What's really happening is that there's this expression of I'm fallen to almost like not obliterate the self, because the self is eternal, but it's almost like make as much space possible for the glories of Krishna. Or it's an expression of Krishna so infinitely great that in comparison to that infinite greatness, any level of finite greatness is just, you know, it's nothing. Because any finite quantity is infinitesimal in comparison to infinity. And so it's just a way of, it's not material self-hatred. It's not material self-criticism. It's an ecstatic way of expressing how great Krishna is by comparison to myself. And so it's not at all like the material version of it. And no one takes it as philosophy. For example, to give an example of something which is just ecstatic speech, but which unfortunately many devotees have taken seriously as a philosophical truth. And that is, you know, I mean, devotees are really great, and I always want to be with devotees, but we're not always that humble, you know. But we talk a good humble. Like, I'm so fallen on your, you know. We got the speech down, but I forgot what I was going to say about that. But oh yeah, so one example of speech, which is really just ecstatic speech, but devotees have put in the wrong category and think it's actually serious philosophy, is that I didn't deserve to be a devotee. I had no qualification. You ever heard that one?
Those
Yeah.
real coolies don't subscribe to that.
So the problem with that statement is that it contradicts a long list of verses in the Bhagavad Gita. It contradicts a lot of things that Krishna says. Like, for example, Krishna says, I precisely reciprocate with everyone. Jejata mam prapadyante. So if you say, I am unqualified, but I became a devotee, what about all the other unqualified people that aren't becoming devotees? What about Krishna's statement that he's fair to everyone, he's equal to everyone, he doesn't favor anyone? There's like a long list of Gita verses that get canceled out by this, I'm so fallen, I have no qualification. And so it's nice as an ecstatic utterance. If you're just expressing a certain spiritual emotion that I'm so fallen, I don't deserve to be a devotee, I have no qualification. That's nice as ecstatic speech, not as philosophical speech. In fact, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, you're sort of drawn into the Hare Krishna movement. Like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm joining the Hare Krishna movement. So, or, you know, if you're born into the movement. Fist bump that. So if you're born into the Hare Krishna movement, then Krishna says, and it's right there in the Gita, read it and weep, you know, it's chapter 6. Krishna says, Purvabhya Sena, by previous practice. Tena, is that Radha? Oh my God, it's you. Purvabhya Sena, by previous practice. Tenaiva, by that alone. Hriyate, a person is literally sort of like carried away. Harati means to take away, like hari. And so hriyate is the passive form of the verb. Someone is just taken away. So hriyate, hyavasho. Avasha in Sanskrit means involuntarily. Vasha in Sanskrit means control. Like Krishna says in the Gita, Vashehi jasyendriyani, one whose senses are under control. So Vasha means control, Avasha, beyond your control. So Krishna says, you're taken away, literally, Hriyate, you're taken away, he indeed, Avasha, beyond your control. So when someone is just, being born in the Hare Krishna movement, that's an example of that. Little kids don't vote. And so if you're born in the movement, or you were just kind of at a certain point, you saw the Hare Krishna movement, and I have to do this. That means Krishna says it's by previous practice and by that alone. And he also says in the next verse, or the verse right next to it, that it is Jnanam Purva Dehikang Labate. One regains spiritual knowledge from their past body. Purva, we have still in English, previous. And Deha, Purva Deha, former body, previous body. And then from that you get the word Purva Dehikam, which becomes an adjective, which means the jnanam, the knowledge, which is Purva Dehikam, from the past body. So Krishna says when you gain this understanding of Krishna consciousness, it's from your past body. And you are drawn into Krishna consciousness or born into Krishna consciousness by your purvabhyasa, by your previous practice, by that alone. And so now my theory is, I'm full of theories, that in the early days of the movement, we just go on the street and chant. I mean, we could have worn kangaroo costumes. I mean, we could have done anything and chanted Hare Krishna, people would have joined. Because we were sort of going through the inventory of past life devotees. And I think what the Hare Krishna movement has to, wake up and smell the kafta, as I say. What the movement has to realize is we have more or less burned through the past life devotee inventory. And we can't just show up. Like all we got to do is show up, and people will. It's a strange, frankly, there's a kind of a troubling side to this sort of overstated Agyata Sukriti, which is that we will manipulate people into their own salvation. That people don't have to consciously participate in their own salvation. We'll do it for them. We will manipulate them and control them. That we actually have the power to control the fruitives. Oops, through the F-bomb. Right?
Better than a cave bomb.
Yeah, better than the cave bomb, right? I mean, it's the idea that we can control the non-devotees and we can manipulate them for their own good into Krishna consciousness, rather than following Krishna's example in the Gita and actually persuading people. And then, of course, people will cite the Bhagavatam, the story of Ajamila. I would say this, a lot of voices say Ajamil, which sounds like a Vedic breakfast cereal. Ajamil. Anyway, the Sanskrit word is actually Ajamila. So in the case of Ajamila is not an example of Agyata Sukriti. Ajamila is a case of real Sukriti, because Ajamila, before he fell down, was a serious devotee. He earned his spiritual status, and therefore Ajamila is an example of Neha Vikramanashosti. On this path, there's no loss or diminution. The Prabhupada said, whatever devotional service you do, it goes forever into your spiritual bank account. And when you become mentally of age, which may take some time, then you get to get access to your bank account. So Ajamila is an example of someone that did service to Krishna, fell down, and then that service was not lost, and he was restored to the position he had earned by his own efforts. That's actually the Jamila story. So this, it's kind of like this. I mean, I don't mean to be pejorative, kind of like this Harry Potter version of Bhakti Yoga, where we just sort of, people don't have to agree to become devotees. They don't even have to like us. We will manipulate them. We will control them. And, our three major activities in Western outreach are actually based on manipulating people that don't really know what's happening, which are Harinam. Doesn't matter if they like it. Doesn't matter if they understand it. Sound went in their ear. We have all the power to manipulate them for their own good. And then book distribution, how many people read the books? How many people understand the books? We don't even care. We are this amazing publisher that does no marketing. We make no effort to find out of all the books we sold, how many people actually read them, how many people could understand them. We don't care. Why? Because we have the power to manipulate them for their own good. They buy the book, even if they throw it out, which in the old airport days, that's where most of the books went. Actually, we have numbers for that. Because airport workers used to make a fortune taking thousands and thousands of hardbound books out and selling them back to devotees for $1 each, and they made a fortune. So we don't, why? Because in the act of buying a book from us, they're saved or they get all this benefit, and they don't have to know what's happening. How many people that buy books believe I just bought the absolute truth? And prasadam. Doesn't matter. Just, prasadam distribution. Most people don't know. They don't think that I'm eating this absolute spiritual food that's non-different from the personality of God. And they just think it just tastes good. And so, again, prasadam, it's just, we're manipulating people for their good with the best intentions, but nonetheless manipulating them. And actually, so it's interesting that all of our, or we have other bridge programs like, yoga, but it's interesting that our main outreach programs, none of them are based on actually persuading intelligent people to become devotees. I just think that's interesting.
I mean, a lot of book distributors actually talk to people,
They do.
and then there's curious people. And then
No, there are, no,
questions and
very
things
good point.
like that.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Yes, there are book distributors. However, no, that's a valid point. That is a valid point. That to the extent to which the book distributors meet, but those are the stories that end up in the Sankirtan newsletter, and they're not most of the people they talk to. So it would be interesting. I mean, you can say something like, this is about yoga, it's about meditation, it's about finding inner peace, it's about, like, who's not for that? So it would be interesting, but again, does the BBT even find out or even care about finding out what percentage of books that are sold involve a meaningful discussion in which the book distributor gives some significant amount of Krishna conscious knowledge of the person as opposed to generic self-improvement? So, yes.
He's a full-time book distributor.
I like to think I'm pretty good one, maybe that you agree. But I keep up with people. I email them, call them, whatnot. But there's different kind of people you meet.
Well, that's very good. I mean, you deserve a lot of credit for that.
There's different kind of people you meet. Like if you're going to shoot 100 books in a day, you probably meet 3 people. Well, I was in Tampa the other day. I probably gathered like 10 emails out of maybe 100 people I talked to.
So based on your past experience, of those 10, how many will continue a relationship
1
with
or
you?
2. It's because I feel like naturally happens. People who are more interested will contact you
Of course.
more than once. Most people who do contact back, it's like a percentage of maybe, if I get 10 contacts, 1 or 2 will contact me back.
And then of those,
And
how
then-
many will sustain it for maybe a month or 2 months?
Yeah, I mean, it's less than that. So maybe 10's not a good number. If I talk to 100 people,
That's in one day. contact 100.
Yeah. So let's say, for example,
Yeah.
let's say, let me give you some numbers. Okay.
A couple a week will contact you more.
Okay. So let's say, let's say in a month.
Yeah.
Let's say in a month you contact 2,500 people in a month.
Okay.
Because I'm sure you have some days off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those 2,500 people, if it's like maybe a couple and 100, then maybe let's say 50, maybe which would be 2%, 2 and 100. Let's say you're sort of interested in contact, and then of those 25 out of 50 out of 2,500, and how many would you say, let's say 3 months later, are still in contact with you?
Small percentage. I mean, maybe 1 or 2. But there's.
But is it smaller than the pizza says? That millions of men, one is
Yeah,
interested,
it's-
one is finally.
But I think we could do a better
That's
job.
good.
I
That's
honestly
really
think,
good.
I honestly think I could do a better job. I think we could do a better job as a whole.
Okay, but
there's a
okay,
lot of
I want to pursue that. First, I'm just going to respond to
Yeah,
right,
okay.
but that's a good point you made. So Manushanang Sahasreshu, among thousands of human beings, no gender bias. Manushanang Sahasreshu Kasyat, someone, Yetati, tries Siddhaye for perfection.
That's like 1 out of thousands.
Thousands of thousands, what are millions?
Yeah.
Sounds like one of those old 50 songs. You're the 1 in a million. So so here, I mean, Krishna says that, and we know he says that. At the same time, we have the acharyas like Prabhupada strongly urging us to save the world, to really make the world Krishna conscious. So it's a paradox. As far as what you said, we can do better. We can, and I want to make clear that I really appreciate, admire what you're doing. I mean, I think it's greatly to your credit that you're doing it for Prabhupada. So
I understand what you mean initially, like with our manipulation and whatnot. I understand what you mean. Like, we shouldn't just go out there and just like depend wholly that we're just giving them a gata security and then someday they're gonna take to it or whatnot magically. I mean, I think we've talked about it before some years ago.
Yeah.
When I was at your house in North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina, where were you?
Yeah, we came by Davidson.
Oh, right. That was fun, huh?
Yeah, I actually just listened to that recording the other day again because I found it. But anyway, we shouldn't just rely on this magical Agyata Sukriti thing that happens. We give them, okay, they got the Prashadam, they got the book, they got the Harinam, the name, and then we just rely that Agyata Sukriti will,
Do the
save
rest.
them. But because we have, like, what I understand, what happened in my life is a devotee got involved in my life.
Right.
Right? And some devotee went out of his comfort zone to really try to get me to chant and get me in devotional service. And he explained how to read the books, how to practice,
No, I completely agree with you.
And he went out, he was like,
But okay, I completely agree with you. I mean, that is wonderful. However, I'm going to give a story about conversation we had with Prabhupada to sort of shed a little light on that. Because it's true, the devotee that helped you deserves eternal credit for that. And you deserve eternal credit for, for accepting Krishna. Now, once we were walking, I've told the story many times, so if you've heard this before, pretend that you haven't. So we were walking with Prabhupada in Rancho Park in LA. It's funny. I often say this, that Prabhupada, I'd go to walk with Prabhupada, in a park, which was my neighborhood park, where I played all the different sports and everything. And I'd walk with Prabhupada over my Little League baseball fields. And it was really, and to get there, we'd go down Motor Avenue. I literally would drive past these beautiful houses. I went to parties when I was in school and everything. And it was a really interesting experience. Krishna arranged. But I remember one time we were walking in Prabhupada in Rancho Park, and he was talking about Krishna's statement to Arjuna, where Krishna says in chapter 11, Mayaiva ite nihata purvamevam. Mayaiva, by me alone. Mayaiva ite, these soldiers, nihata, are slain by me alone. Pur mayaive te nihata purvameve. Christ used the word eva, which means very emphatic. That by me alone, these soldiers have already, purvameve, purva means before, purvameve means like already. I alone have already killed all these soldiers. Nimitta matram, bhava, you be just the instrument, savyasacham, lefty. Savyasacham. So, and then Prabhupada said, Prabhupada was actually kind of almost like theatrically, he was playing the part of Arjuna and Krishna and reenacting the dialogue. And Arjuna was saying, oh, I can't do this. And so Krishna was telling Arjuna, it is already done. I've already done it. Now, if you like, you take the credit. I will give you the credit. If not, I'll give it to someone else. But why don't you take the credit? And so then Prabhupada looked at us and he said, similarly, Lord Chaitanya has already spread his movement, but he's giving you this chance to serve him for your own benefit. So why don't you be the instrument? If you don't become the instrument, someone else will be. But why don't you take the credit? You take the credit and become Lord Chaitanya's instrument. And so that devotee had helped you. Basically, Krishna brought together a very sincere soul that wanted to help others and a very sincere soul that was ready to be helped, that was ready to accept the absolute truth. And Krishna brought you two together so that that devotee could have the credit. One time, Prabhupada was talking to Vishnu Jana. You know Vishnu Jana? I miss him, Vishnu Jana. He was really a good guy. Any of you know Vishnu Jana? You knew him? No. Yeah. He was, I've described it, he was a big guy. He was a big, strong guy. And really nice, gentle and strong, but he was really a nice guy. And anyway, that's a whole other story, Vishnu Jana. But so one time he was talking to Prabhupada, and he said, and Prabhupada told him, you're doing very nicely in your preaching. And I know that's true because there was a devotee in the room sitting next to Vishnu Jana, who was a friend of mine, and I talked to him literally within a day or two after this happened. He told me, word for it, and he was sane and intelligent, so I take this as bona fide. So he said, Prabhupada said to him, you're doing very well. And Vishnu Jana said, it's just your mercy, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, I offer my mercy to everyone, but you accepted it. So anyway, I guess it's getting late, and that's because Prabhupada trained me. Because, Prabhupada never talked to me about cucumbers. Like, you sell diamonds, you have very few customers if you sell cucumbers. Actually, I remember in West Bengal back then when we used to go to India, literally you could buy a wagon load of vegetables for like a nickel or something. It was unbelievably cheap. And so when Prabhupada said that saying about selling cucumbers, probably giving them away. So, if you sell diamonds, when did Prabhupada say that if you sell diamonds or very few customers? And so Prabhupada would say that when he was encouraging his spiritual children who were discouraged because they weren't getting much result in their preaching. Because, he was their loving father. He wanted to cheer them out. Don't worry, you can't expect much. But when Prabhupada saw that one of his disciples was actually doing a lot, there was no cucumber katab. So I remember when I went to Latin America and just by Krishna's miraculous mercy, the movement just started growing like anything. And I remember walking into Prabhupada's room one time, I think it was in New York, Brooklyn. I walked in his room and I have all these memories or just maybe impressions. Prabhupada was so, focused on his mission. I have so many impressions of offering obeisances to Prabhupada. Now still on the way back up, and he just launched into his, didn't even want to wait till I got it. I just went down to business. This is what we have to do. I remember when Prabhupada flew to Gainesville. Actually, we're in Gainesville. And I hosted Prabhupada in Gainesville in 1971, and I picked him up at the Jacksonville airport because they didn't have flights to Gainesville back then. This was 1971, and there was no security. There's no airport security. You just walk right up to the gate. And so I was, at that time, I was temple president of Gainesville. I was a Gurhasta, the true vowel R, by the way, Gurhasta. And I was 22 years old. And we all know how mature 22-year-old male brains are. So I was 22 years old, and so Prabhupada came through the air bridge. He came through the tunnel, and I offered obeisances, and I didn't think that Prabhupada's standing there, in the middle of the tunnel, waiting for me to go through all my piety. And so then when I stood up, the first thing Prabhupada said to me was, "Which way?" I remember so many times just when he asked me to be GBC. I mean, all my impressions are when Prabhupada called me, I'd offer obeisances, and I was still on the way up, and let's get down to it. So Prabhupada was so incredibly focused on his mission. His whole life was his mission. He could be resting, he could be joking, he could be eating, but he never forgot his mission, ever. And so, well, wait until all this prasadam it's only for men, right? This is this one. This is this one. Anyway, yeah, go ahead and bring the prasadam. Oh, that's mine? So anyway, I just ask, all of you are great souls because you're trying to serve Krishna, but somehow or other we have to rebuild the Western Hare Krishna movement. Somehow or other. Even if we... Oh.
I was asking Ishra how old he was. He was a 22-year-old male.
Who made this?
Does anyone want to?
Spoon? Oi, pessoal. Quando é que a gente vai jogar? This is Samakunda. Her mother is Mitra from Brazil, from Rio Grande do Sul. Oh, hi everybody. Facebook. Oh, sorry. We've been neglecting you. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. Sorry we forgot about you guys. But, we're going to take prasadam now. Even if we can't save the world right now, we can sure eat. So thank you all very much for listening on Facebook, and I hope we'll see you soon.